ASMR True Crime channel. Today we will discuss a story about Candy Rogers that was a cold case for a very long time until recently. Candy Rogers, then 9 years old, left her West Central Spokane house in the afternoon of March 6th in 1959 to vent campfire mints across her community. There was no sign of her reappearance as the hours went by. Her family started to feel hopeless and they started to fear the worst. Then, following 2 exhausting weeks and numerous extensive searches for her, a devastating revelation was revealed. But what precisely happened to Candy? To ensure you never miss another video, please first click the subscribe button and the notification bell if you haven't already done so. Thus, with no further ado, let's get started solving this mystery. We will be visiting Spokane, a city in the U.S. state of Washington, for today's case. It is well liked by outdoor enthusiasts due to its stunning natural surroundings and rich cultural history. The Spokane River flows through the middle of the city, which has a bustling downtown with many of places to eat, shop, and have fun. Candy was born in 1950 and her parents were Elaine and Carl Rogers. She was the only child, thus her parents loved her very much. Unknown circumstances eventually brought Elaine and Carl's marriage to an end, which led to their divorce and separate lives. Candy, however, continued to be under the supervision of her mother, a teacher at the time. Elaine made every effort to provide her kid the finest possible care. Candy was well known in her neighborhood and was regarded by those who knew her as a sweet, pleasant kid who enjoyed jokes. Candy was 9 years old and enrolled in Holmes Elementary School in 4th grade by 1959. Like most girls in her age group, Candy became a member of the Bluebirds, a youth group. The Bluebirds were younger campfire girls. The group's mission is to educate and to engage girls in leisure activities that promote self-reliance, personal development, and a connection to the natural world. Candy strongly participated in all of the group's activities, which included hiking, camping, excursions, volunteer work, and a variety of other pursuits. She embraced every minute and threw herself into every task. Candy's future was bright and everyone around her could see that she was developing into a joyful, intelligent young lady. But nobody could have predicted that she would soon be taken away by a devastating catastrophe that would rock the entire town. Candy got home from school on March 6 in 1959, and she and her mother lived together. It was a Friday, and she was excited to spend the Saturday and Sunday with her friends. But first, she had another thing she wanted to do. Members of the Bluebirds were expected to sell a variety of chocolates around their area in order to generate money for one of their future festivities. Candy intended to sell 7 cartons of campfire mints that day. She begged permission from her mother Elaine to go out and do this, and she got it. But Elaine, her mother, said that she had to be home before dark. Candy had always complied with this restriction, but Elaine made sure to remind her of it each time she left the house. Elaine would never have let her daughter to leave the house if she had known that day would have been different. Candy had an oatmeal cookie as as a snack and spent a little time playing with their family dog. Subsequently, she retrieved the boxes of campfire mints and left the house. It was a little later, after 4 p.m., that she joined a group of girls her age who were going door to door that fateful afternoon to sell chocolate. But what exactly happened later is unknown, but Candy never came back to her house. It was around 5:30 p.m. when Elaine started to worry. She was aware that Candy was not usually out this late. As the minutes slowly dragged by, it seemed like hours to Elaine, and she kept listening for the familiar sound of Candy's footsteps approaching the house, but they never came. Her anxiousness had increased dramatically by around 6 p.m., and she was certain that something had gone wrong. She notified Candy's grandfather, Stanley Newton, about the situation. By 6:30 p.m., Candy still had not returned home, so a small group of individuals were out looking for her, along with other family, friends, and neighbors. When they first started looking through the neighborhood, some people said that they had seen her earlier strolling around with the boxes of campfire mints, but no one seems to know exactly where she might be at this point. Although it was getting harder to search her in the fading light, they continued to hope that Candy would be located before sunset as the sky grew darker. The missing girl was eventually reported to the authorities, and police and sheriff's deputies soon joined the search effort. Around 9 p.m., a group of searchers found some boxes of campfire mints the same day. Many thought they were the identical ones Candy had been peddling when they were discovered laying across Pettit Drive. Candy had left the house with 7 campfire mint boxes, but only 6 were discovered that evening. The hunt for Candy that evening was fruitless, as she was nowhere to be found. Elaine, her mother, had a hard time falling asleep at all that night. Her mind was racing with ideas, and she questioned whether her daughter was all right. She grieved silently and prayed that Candy would come home to her safely, because the uncertainty was just too much for her to handle. It was a Saturday morning when the news of Candy's disappearance had reached nearly every resident of the city. Kind-hearted people came in great numbers to start the day's search. During the search, officers drove vehicles and mounted horses. They peered along main highways and through the forests. A helicopter sent by the Air Force also aided in the hunt. 4 experienced crew members and a pilot boarded the aircraft, and they took off. Unfortunately, the pilot crashed into a high-tension wire while flying over the Spokane River because he was flying too close to it. 3 of the 5 guys on board were killed instantly when the chopper lost control and plunged into the Spokane River. That day, 3 men tragically lost their lives. Airman Marlise D. Ray, Sergeant William A. McDonnell, and Lieutenant Kenneth G. Fadish. The tragedy had upset everyone who had joined the search for Candy, but it didn't stop them from continuing their search. They increased their efforts since they were still persistent. They all desired that the 3 heroes' deaths would not have been in vain, but no matter how hard they searched, they were unable to find Candy for several days. It was as if she had simply vanished without a trace. As time went on and Candy remained missing, Elaine, her mother, started to resemble a shadow of her former self. She would always look into space and refuse to touch her food. Her only daughter's disappearance was gradually driving her crazy. She could not handle the weight that was was on her heart. Candy had been gone for 16 days on March 22nd in 1956 when she was finally located. That day, Candy's house was roughly 7 miles distant from a wooded region where two pilots, Howard Lawrence and Richard Bergen, were hunting woodchucks. They came onto a little clearing in the jungle and saw a little pair of suede shoes that were blue. The shoes' modest size and fine craftsmanship suggested that they belonged to a toddler. Puzzled as to how the shoes had made it this far out of town, they wondered. They picked up the shoes and headed back to base after taking a few moments to scan the area and to see if someone would come out to claim them. The news of the discovery was quickly widespread as the two men could not stop talking about it. After receiving the shoes, the police got in touch with Candy's grandfather to see if he could help identify them. Candy's grandfather confirmed to the authorities that the shoes did in fact resemble the ones she had previously worn. With this confirmation, officers decided to focus their search on the area where the shoes had been found. Since it had grown dark, conducting a search would be difficult at night, and so they agreed to wait until the next morning. Sunday dawned the next day, and a group of volunteers and police had reached the location where the shoes had been discovered. They started searching the area right away, but at first they were unable to find anything. After a while, one of the officers unexpectedly spotted a little pile composed of pine needles and bushes. It struck him as odd, so he decided to investigate further. He quickly removed the leaves with cautions to uncover the child's decaying body after seeing, much to his horror, a knee showing from beneath the pile. She was the little child they had been searching for, and he knew it at first glance. Her garments were ripped in several places, and when examining her feet, the officer saw that they were bound. This had been accomplished using a ripped strip of cloth. There was another piece of fabric wrapped around her neck. The body was removed from the scene for an autopsy not long after the police promptly informed the other searchers. Candy's family members were notified right away. Elaine passed out and needed to be sedated after learning that her daughter had died. Many individuals started to worry for their own safety as well as the protection of their children after that. Candy's body had had an autopsy and the results showed that she had been abused before being strangled to death. Detectives from the Spokane Police Department got to work right away trying to identify the perpetrator. Police Chief Clifford Payne had informed the reporters at the time. "We'll put everything available man on the case and keep them there till the thing is solved. We know what we're looking for now. We're looking for a maniac," he stated. Despite questioning a large number of people, police were unable to obtain any useful information. Hugh Byron Morse, an imprisoned serial killer, was the first person the authorities suspected of carrying out the crime, and they had strong grounds to think he was involved. Candy's garments had a weird purple smudge that smelled like grape gum, and Morse had a particular fondness for grape gum, which was discovered at the autopsy. However, he denied having anything to do with Candy's murder when questioned about it. Charges could not be made against him since there was no proof that he was the murderer they were searching for, but for a very long period he was the case's principal suspect. Detectives looked into a number of tips that came in following Candy's death, but none of them turned up anything useful. After Candy was finally buried, her heartbroken relatives prayed years after Candy passed away in June 1963, her father Carl tragically committed suicide because he was unable to deal with losing his daughter. As the years passed, many people's memories of Candy started to fade, but her family and the Spokane Police Department detectives never forgot. This is the kind of case that's been the giant logjam for cold cases, and in Spokane I keep saying it's the Mount Everest of our old cases, the one that we could never seem to overcome. Mayor Crime Detective Zach Stormont of the Spokane Police Department said, DNA technology was non-existent in the 1950s, but in 2001 it had advanced significantly. The clothes Candy was wearing when her death was discovered have been carefully preserved by the investigators as proof. In the hopes of finding the killer's DNA, these clothings were now sent to the lab. As soon as forensic experts started to work, they discovered that Candy's underpants contained DNA. This allowed them to separate the DNA, which was then utilized to build a DNA profile. Detectives were feeling more connected than ever to the case, so it was an exciting time. After that, the freshly created DNA profile was entered into the database. Sadly, no matches were discovered. Investigators compared the DNA profile to that of Morse in 2002. The man has been on their radar for some time. They were disappointed to learn, though, that he was not the man they had been searching for. For a long while, nothing noteworthy would come to light. At the age of 82, Candy's mother passed away peacefully at home in September 2006, leaving her sad. She passed away without knowing who had murdered her beloved daughter. In 2017, forensic genealogy gained attention as a novel scientific approach that was being utilized to crack a number of unsolved cases. The technique solves crimes and locates missing people by utilizing DNA analysis along with conventional genealogy techniques. Put another way, it uses science and family history research to piece together hints and provide victims and their loved ones with justice. Detectives agreed to attempt the method, which was becoming more and more popular, in order to help them solve Candy's murder. Brittany Wright, a forensic scientist with the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory Division, got assigned to the case. Around the time she was able to get her hands on a DNA sample that had been stored in the crime lab freezer since 2001. The next thing she did was reanalyze the sample to confirm that it matched the original perpetrator's DNA profile from 2001. Upon confirming this, she followed up with a diagnostic analysis to determine if it could be used for forensic genealogy. The sample was then sent to a private forensic lab. However, this turned out to be a futile effort, as according to the lab, the DNA sample was too degraded to work with. The revelation completely crushed the hopes of the detectives, who could barely contain their disappointment. It would take another year after this before the detectives had a breakthrough. They discovered about a specific lab that could effectively work with damaged DNA, such as the facility that treated Candy. Outram was the name of the lab, which was situated in Texas. Brittany contacted them to see if Candy's case qualified. She then sent along a tiny portion of the remaining DNA sample for analysis after hearing back favorably. The lab returned 6 months later with a result. There are 3 brothers who have been named as potential suspects. John, Andrew, and Terry Huff were their names. The 3 of them were, as it turned out, long deceased. Detectives learned that one of the males, John, had a daughter called Katie after conducting additional research. They made the decision to get in touch with her to detectives a sample of her DNA, which they examined, yielding an astounding result. The results showed that Kathy's DNA was linked to the suspect DNA profile 2.9 million times more frequently than the general population. This strengthened the police conviction that John was the murderer they had been hunting for decades. After running a background check on him, they learned that in addition to growing up in Spokane, he was living approximately a mile away from Candy's house when she was killed. He had a difficult past as well. He entered in the army in 1956 when he was 17 years old. However, he was jailed for attacking a woman in 1961, 2 years after Candy's death. According to reports, he had approached the woman and used force to remove her clothes while she struggled and screamed for help. He then used the clothes to tie her up before trying to strangle her. Luckily, the woman survived the ordeal. For the crime, John spent 6 months in prison, and when he got out, the army labeled him as a deserter and discharged him from service. After this, John led a pretty normal life. He worked as a door-to-door salesman and also in a lumber yard to make ends meet. However, at the young age of 31, he ended up taking his own life. In addition, investigators discovered what may be a relationship between Candy and John. At the time of Candy's death, Huff's stepsister, a 10-year-old campfire girl, had adopted the role of Candy's big sister in the program. This is how investigators thought John may have met Candy. After learning all of this about John, the investigators made the decision to carry out one last investigation to establish that he was Candy's murderer. After getting a search warrant and authorization from Kathy, they went to the cemetery where John was buried and dug up his body. His remains were sampled for DNA, which was subsequently sent to a facility for analysis. As anticipated by the detectives, John turned out to be Candy's murderer. Candy's surviving family members were notified of the case's breakthrough and made contact with. John Paul's Candy's cousin, 77 at the time, said, "It's not closure, but at least there is some form of satisfaction knowing that the person that did this is at least named. He may be in grave, but he is named." But Candy's parents and grandparents never found out who killed her, and it grieved Candy's relatives to this day. They never saw him pay or die for it or whatever. They went to their grave not knowing, and that was hard, Joanne continued. As for Kathy, the revelation that her father was a murderer shook her to the bones. It's just really sad to find out that someone, not even just your dad, but someone in your family, could do something like that. Kathy said John passed away when she was only 9, and she grew up believing that he had done it out of depression. Now I think, no, he was evil, she said. It wasn't an escape and away from it, but he got to die with people thinking he was an upstanding man, and he wasn't. Kathy also rendered a public apology for her father's crime and the pain it caused the murdered girl's family. "I'm very, very sorry for what my dad did, that he took her life horribly," she said. "I hope that it gives peace knowing that even though it's not really justice because he doesn't get any punishment, his name has this on it now and it can now be solved." A family was thrown into turmoil and kept in the dark for over 60 years due to the actions of one man, but the persistent efforts of multiple generations of investigators helped to identify him and provide much-needed closure to the grieving family. But do you believe that John killed Candy on purpose, or was it just a random